Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Funniest story ever for me. Well, it wasn't the funniest. There's so many funny stories. In fact, I need to ask some of my volunteers that are still around, just what their funniest story is. I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do it today, though. But I was on a road trip 3 years in a row. Now, I did middle school mountain trips every year. I did high school mountain trips every year. Once again, we live in the sand. So if you live in the sand, you probably go to the snow, try to stretch your people. If you live in anywhere else in the United States, especially on the East Coast, there might be one trip you take occasionally from the snow or the cold to the heat, which would be most probably Florida if it's going to be in the wintertime, or the Florida Keys or something like that. Maybe Disney, So we went to the mountains. And we would take a sleeper bus. And 3 years in a row, this happened. And so I would assign a staffer to every 5 middle school students. Now, some of you say, well, we could do every 10 or what. I just really like safety. So we tried to get as many staff as we possibly could to go on these trips so it would make the burden really light. And there was a lot of growth between staffers and students because they were not so many that they couldn't have an individual conversation with every one of them, and some fun times. So we would load up the bus, usually either late at night or some cases right after school, sometimes early in the morning, just depending on the year and when those things could happen, but usually right before the end of winter break, Christmas break, things like that. And so middle school trip, sleeper bus, we break down into beds. We have the upper bunks, the next bunks, and then the lower bunks, which would become our seats when we put them back into a living room setting. They'd normally seat, around 40 people or so if they were just seated buses. And so we'd load the kids up, after we prayed with them, got our stuff together and all that, and we'd be on the road. Well, about 3 years is how long you're going to have people in middle school each time. So this particular guy was on all 3 trips during all 3 years of his middle school years, and he did the same thing on every trip. I think I finally got it by the 3rd year, and made sure, that the staffers knew what was probably going to happen. We made sure that, we wanted them to have a good time. This is away from home. It was going to be 3 days and 4 days and 3 nights, something like that. We'd get them a mile high up in the place called Newfound Gap. We try to go there first because if there's any chance of being snow, it would be there. So we would definitely do all night driving. And so they would be able to take all the food they want as long as it wasn't liquid. They could not bring their own drinks. We'd stop and let them get drinks and go to the bathroom, that sort of thing. But they could bring the food that they wanted. We didn't know how much food certain kids could stuff into their bellies, though. And, we should have, but some kids were better at it than others. And this one guy would bring the largest bag of Skittles he could possibly bring. And before that night was over, he would have usually eaten the entire bag. And by the time the night rolled around and it was morning, somewhere along the way, each year, he would throw up the bag of Skittles. So those of us who were not in charge of him were, the first year we were going, oh, no, this is horrible. The next year we're going, hey, he's your kid. And so they would take care of that. But that was, when you tell the story to those of you listening going, oh, or that is hilarious, but we like to give them as much latitude as possible so that they enjoyed each trip, felt like they had some control, because in reality they had no control, because each of them had a staffer that walked around everywhere that they went. So that was that kind of road trip. And we were there 24 hours a day with them until we got back. Those of you who have done retreats, you understand this. And this happened year after year after year after year after year. We did 35 years of those sort of retreats. And multiple retreats a year. So you can imagine what it was like to have this one kid. But it only happened once a year, so you might have forgotten until the next year. But after the second year, we did not forget. We knew what was coming by his 8th grade year, his 3rd year. So somebody was in charge of that. Well, that was one type. And, we probably had 30 students on each one of those trips on the average, plus our staff. And so that's one type of road trip. And we had many, many road trips with our students. We had a few boat trips. Usually they were day trips, things like that. We did have one to where we were snorkeling, and thank God it was only a few hours because we were out snorkeling, but the diesel fumes were coming over the back of the boat from the front to the back. I guess they had stacks or something like that. So we were breathing heavily diesel fumes, and most of us got seasick. And so my thought was, well, you put your mask on, you dive in the water. My understanding, once you get in the water, the seasickness goes away. That is not true. It doesn't. So many of us turned green. Many of us were throwing up. And the reason I'm telling you that one on top of the other one, a lot of throw up stories here, is because we're going to talk about rusting out and burning out. That we're going to talk about an official story from LinkedIn post about rust out, which is a new phrase. We always talked about burning out, burnout, oh, I burned out, whatever. That was years. And now there's a whole phrase of rust out. We used to think, well, rust out is good. I'd rather rust out than burnout. Well, not after I read you what one official source says and what one doctor says about that, how to maybe overcome it. And you're going to experience some of this if you go through long-term student ministry. Now, who had the longest lock-in ever? You might be able to find another one somewhere along the way throughout the scriptures, but the longest lock-in ever with probably more than just throw up was Noah. Talk about some burnout. You ought to really be having burnout, because at 500 years old, he had his first 3 sons. And by 600 years of age, he was on the ark, which it took him 120 years to build, not at the encouragement of his neighbors, and probably some discouragement from his wife and family at times. And so Noah's boat, and they describe it in Genesis 6:15, would have been huge for its time, about 450 feet long, the length of 1.5 football fields. That's 5 times as long as the Mayflower in which the Pilgrims sailed to North America in 1620. And it's more than half as long as a modern 860-foot ocean liner. We're talking, if you want the instructions, the Bible gives you instructions that God gave Noah how to build this ark, what the wood was supposed to be like, what kind of stuff they were going to make it waterproof with, where the doors went and the window, all that. And how many, and you'll be surprised if you didn't read this before, how many animals actually were on the ark. So we're talking, and he's got his family, and his kids have grown up now. They have spouses and grandchildren, the whole bit. Who's going to feed the serpent area, the serpentine, serpentarium area? I don't like snakes. Who you going to assign to what? I want the elephants. I want the giraffes. Everybody can't do the elephants and giraffes. We got to split this thing up. So you're on this not only just a road trip. Now it's a water trip, and you're sealed in. And the length of time was 150 days. I don't feel too bad about my retreats now after thinking about Noah. being on the ark. Now, I did this for 35 years, and I did a lot of volunteer hours with my church and camps and things like that from the time I was 15 years of age. And then I did more volunteer hours as a chaplain for a baseball team at a local college, years after I resigned my last position. But still, you're 500 years old, and God's telling you to build an ark. You're 600, it's 120 years, so a little less than 500. 120 years to build this thing, and you're on it for 150 days. I think Noah gets the prize. Ding, 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 ding. He gets the gold star or the Medal of Honor or whatever it is for surviving, not the animals. That probably wasn't the hardest part. I'm guessing his wife and children and spouses and grandkids. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? When can we get off? Why did you do this? My friends are gone. Just if you can imagine, do I really have to take the poop out again? So you've got this kind of road trip. Now, so LinkedIn Post says this. That's why I got you those stories. I want to make it real biblical. But this is happening if you're going long-term in anything. And here's what the article said in LinkedIn. Burnout at work is a well-known problem, but a new opposite term has recently surfaced in well-being discussions called rust out. Rust out occurs when employees feel underutilized. I don't think they felt that on the ark. I think they felt overutilized and understimulated in their jobs. They may have been understimulated. How much poop can you do, deal with? Work seems monotonous and devoid of personally meaningful aspects, which can hurt performance and mental health. Gallup's Global Workplace Report for 2022 found that only 21% of people feel engaged in their jobs. In your case, possibly your ministry. If you're bivocational, maybe your job and ministry. Europe was the region with the lowest percentage of engaged employees at 14%. This came from an ER doctor who responded to that post, and it's so good. So I think leaders may help rust out by doing this. And here's what she wrote, or he wrote. I don't remember if it was he or she. Number one, setting challenging and meaningful goals. Number two, providing opportunities for learning and growth. Number three, offering job rotation as cross-training. In other words, don't make people stay in the same position. If they're really good at it, they still need some kind of breaks. I used to give my volunteers breaks. Some of them that were so gung-ho, so amazing that after years, they just wouldn't take a break all year long, and I finally would make some of them that had been there a while take 3-month breaks, and it was tough being without them because they were so good and that good. Number four, recognizing and rewarding accomplishments. Number five, asking their team, what are you interested in and how can I help? The bottom line is that it is critical to create a culture of trust where leaders are asking the right questions and employees feel, or volunteers in your case, or if you have multiple staff that are hired, if you're a larger organization or church, and employees feel comfortable sharing their honest opinions. Do your volunteers and employees feel comfortable sharing their honest opinions? Probably with me sometimes and not always, not all the time, if I'm honest. People who feel like they are rusting on the job can share with their managers, look for a new role, and re-inject enjoyable activities into their personal life. And bosses who spot rusty workers should help them speak up and co-develop a progression plan. What are you going to do next? If you go back and listen to Kristen Lascola just a few episodes ago, who has been a middle school youth pastor for 19 years and 22 years total for her volunteer years in there as well. She, talks about some of those. There was a progression that happened from the other youth pastor that brought her in, And they kept progressing to what her duties and what her things that she did was. Great person to listen to about all those things. So, here are my thoughts. This happens especially if the staff, congregation, or whatever organization you are a part of has not run you off in the first 1 to 2 years. Then they may just let you run yourself into the ground, being satisfied with what they are getting out of you and giving you no room for growth or expansion. Why? Because a lot of places, a lot of churches don't even understand what it is to have someone last a long time in student ministries. They weren't prepared for it. They weren't looking for it. They expected you to be gone in a year or two because that's the average, at the most 5 years. And people try to run you off at about year 5 going, well, I think they've run their race. That's it. Let's go to a new person. Let's get rid of them, because they've learned what you do well, what you do badly, and different things like that. The key there is to stay ahead of the game and always want more than your congregation wants, and explain it to them and be clear with them. That's easier said than done. And here's the rest of what I wrote for you. Especially if you are being worked on, especially if you are doing work on a God-sized scale, we need God-sized rest. Are you hearing that? Especially if we are doing work on a God-sized scale, are you there on a mission, or are you there for a job? If you're there on mission, it's because God put you on mission and you understand it's a mission, and your goal is to take as many students and their families to heaven as you possibly can, disciple them to where they can grow with or without you. That takes a lot of work. It ends up with a lot of heartache. It ends up with a lot of frustration. And I go on. We need God-sized rest. Like Jesus or the prophets of old, rusting out may be better than burning out, but burning up, while often reducing stress. By the way, that's why my book is called Burn Up, not, and in parentheses or subtitle, Burn Up, not out. While often reducing stress and taking breaks like Jesus did is better, because burning up includes rest, fuel, encouragement, fresh ideas, spiritual food, physical food, mental renewal, and creativity, plus. Keep adding in the blanks. So I was with a guy by the name of Dr. Jay Strack. I interviewed him. You can go back, and somewhere in the teens, 20s, and 30s, I don't have that in front of me, exactly which episode that was. In fact, there's 2 episodes, A and B. You need to hear both of Dr. Jay Strack from Student Leadership University, the creator of that, and Youth Pastor Summit. And we talked about creativity and things like that. And one of my trainers said, he changed his job every 5 years. Well, in perspective for him, he developed entire cities for Youth for Christ. But I said something on one thing that he taught me. He says, do the things that you do right and do best. He said, and what I do is I change every 5 years. I go through my bag of tricks and what I do, whether he said bag of tricks, I think he did. And so I said something like to Dr. Strack, well, Dr. Strack Jay Strack is very innovative, constantly training, constantly changing, constantly trying to find the new ideas. And I said something like that to him. He says, whoa. He said, no. He says, you don't do that at all. What you do is you must constantly change, constantly put out something new for your students and your staff. You have to be consistently on the edge and training and changing. The only thing that doesn't change is Scripture, the gospel. Jesus doesn't change. God doesn't change, but your methods must change on a regular basis. If you look at Dr. Strack, you follow those things, then you will see, you will be able to follow some other organizations that are constantly changing. Even Kristen Lascola, as well as Orange and some other people and places out there that you can find. You can constantly and completely keep changing and developing and keep from rusting out by going to those meetings and things. God gives us no more than what we can do, by the way. That's what he does. If we're following him and depending on him. And that's why Matthew 11:28 through 30 is some of my favorite verses In the New Living Testament, it says it this way. Did Jesus say, what Jesus did say is this, to come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. That's the key part. One thing I did for a lot of my life is I would say, okay, God, what do you want? Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? And okay, well, let's go. And when I would try to do a lot of things on my own, he'd give me direction, then I'd bolt. When I would step back and listen and pray more and listen more and write more down of what I thought God was saying to me, I would find things would get easier and easier. It took me years and years and years to get there, and I still had to fight my old nature to run ahead of God. But his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and that yoke is something, if you break it down, you can look that up yourself. I'm not going to go into any more of that. But you're going to have kids over and over throwing up their skillets. You're not going to be on a road trip as long as Noah, and you're not going to be in a ministry as long as it took Noah to build the ark. But God you'll still feel challenged and still feel at times that you're rusting out, you're burning out, you're just about to lose your mind at times. And you need to go back to that and say, God, show me your favor, give me your favor. I pray that before I walk into every building now, before I walk into my home. And I don't take any of it for granted anymore, which I did in the past. And I start going, Lord, your yoke is easy, your burden is light. I need a refreshing for my soul. I don't need my stuff to overcome. I need you because my stuff is hard and it's complex because it's not you, and you are easy and light. So there you go, everybody. I hope this helps you go to that next level and gives you a great week and a great month and a great year. Remember, you didn't have to do what Noah did. You might be able to endure this next thing, this next level, this next whatever God's got for you. Adios, youth workers and friends. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.